Hey everybody, welcome back to the Feature Crew podcast. We are now fully formed again. Dylan is back from his European adventure and eager
Glad
to
to be
talk
back.
about some awesome AI news.
Let's do it. Really just hot off the press is SSI getting a $1 billion
Yes.
investment, right? So I think
Yeah,
that said, Reuters or whatever, it said it was probably valued at about $5 billion. For, audience who doesn't know, this was the company started by Illya, who used to be, I believe, the chief scientist, something to that effect, of OpenAI. So one of the original founders. This is a very
Seen as very much
hot
one of
thing.
the big brains behind the AI revolution, right? Like he's
Yep.
been involved
Yeah.
since the early AlexNet days, and has been involved in a bunch of significant steps in the transformer architecture sort of revolution, and then in the LLM revolution. So when he left OpenAI, that was a big deal. And as Dylan was saying, this is his next step is to found a company whose only product will be safe superintelligence.
I mean, that's what they've declared, right? And, question to you two. Do you know anything else they've actually announced? I think there's something to discuss here of that is a lot of money in terms of when you think of any kind of startup making $1 billion to say, here's our idea and we have no actual product. However, we could also make the claim that $1 billion to make superintelligence is also a very small amount of money, actually, especially when we talk about some of the other hot news things. But what are your thoughts? Are you bullish on SSI? I know it's kind of like a heartthrob on Twitter and stuff like that, but I guess lots of differing opinions here.
I don't think. Well, first of all, it seems like the single product long-term vision is like the gimmick, potentially one of the gimmicks of the company.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also seems to be a shot at OpenAI. Like one of the big complaints of OpenAI, it seems like, is that they're focusing too much on product and too much on attracting users and not enough on safety. And so, if you believe that, then you see Illya's announcement of our only focus and our only product is safe superintelligence, and we're not going to do anything in the meantime to make money. Then you probably like that. But I think, Dylan's question of is 1 billion going to get us superintelligence? I don't think if you asked any of the investors if they thought this first round was going to get them superintelligence, right? This 1 billion is for some potentially cool demo, more likely interesting paper that justifies another round that's larger.
Yeah, I'm with that. That's where my head's at. Is I'm like, look, we're in the frontier model space. You're talking hundreds of billions now, right? That's the rumors.
Yeah.
Just 100 billion plus, that sort of stuff. So $1 billion to me seems like we can't actually believe that's going to get us to, unless they have some freakishly novel architecture that no one's heard of and no one has any hint about. I agree, it seems like a proof of concept notion, or it seems like an initial round. I think it's an uphill fight. You're so late to this fight to be starting a brand new frontier model. There were rumors before they put this out that it was more of, we're going to figure out how to do alignment and safety, and so then you're sort of a tool for the other frontier models to use. But that was not the framing I got from this funding announcement. The framing I got was, we're going for superintelligence, nothing else matters, and it's going to be safe superintelligence. That's the differentiator. Which, awesome if you can do it, but God, that doesn't seem like enough money to pull that off.
Yeah, I feel like there's the classic thing of, the iron triangle here, and going after intelligence and going after safety seem to be two opposing factors. Again, as you said, unless there's some crazy novel architecture that has been cooking up in Illya's head. But it doesn't seem that simple, right? And I feel like that was OpenAI's kind of play. They were like, we're doing safety, and then suddenly they're like, we need to chase intelligence, we'll bake safety in later. And there's a whole host of issues of why that's, caused a lot of strife. I'm glad that SSI exists and that it's actually going after safety, right? Responsible AI, super important, and, something we do at Microsoft. So that is great. However, it just seems very high and mighty, we're going to make safe superintelligence with this little amount of money. And how many people have they got now? 10 folks at SSI.
10, I think, yeah.
That's, maybe they really do have something cooked up that'll be pretty incredible, but it's interesting to see that there's still quite a lot of potentially hype. So I don't know, as you say, it's very expensive paper. 1 billion to get like another round.
Right.
Kind of crazy.
Yeah, I mean, might be the greatest fundraiser of all time, right? I mean, maybe Elon
Yeah.
takes the cake on that, but I mean, you're on $1 billion at without pre-product is next level. So kudos. But I tend to align with it. I don't see how you. I also don't get the logistics of it, right? If this does end in an arms race, if you're talking about a few winners at a global level, and you're talking money getting thrown around at like nation-state levels, and governments getting involved, you see OpenAI has an NSA member on the board. They've agreed to government supervision of models. That's all hinting at scale being tremendous and funding being outrageous and needing to find new power sources to fund the. I mean, you're talking just incredible Manhattan Project-style rollout, and then, hey, I got $1 billion. Maybe I'm just a cynic. I don't know. But I don't see how that gets you to play in the board or play on that field. And I don't know what the incentive would be in an arms race to pause.
Yeah.
I think that's something that's come up in the AI community before, but it seems even more relevant nowadays.
100%. Couldn't agree more. And that's kind of been playing out with OpenAI, right? Like, it's been a very kind of obvious shift of, you look back a year or two, lots of open papers, lots of discussion about safety, and now it's like, literally being nationalized, lots of like, closed source, but, we can certainly speculate more on that later, but interesting times.
Yeah, exciting. Kind of wait and see. I'm excited to see the first notions they put out. I don't know, because if they're going for superintelligence or bust, do they put out products along the way, or are we just going to get papers? I don't know. I'm
Right.
just curious. It's piqued our interest. I wish I had something more clever to say than that's a huge fundraising round in any world except for frontier models, in which case then it doesn't look like enough.
Right.
Yeah, too true. Great summary. Speaking of fundraising rounds, or rather lots of money being spent actually, Sam A and OpenAI, they're talking about investing, how much was it, like 10 billion into,
was it tens of billions?
tens of billions. So maybe that's a useful, kind of model. Now we're talking about like, orders of magnitude more than like SSI. Right. Like these are the actual like, fundraising rounds being thrown around. So I'm trying to pull up the information.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, that there was discussion here about it wasn't just Apple and Nvidia. I think like Microsoft was also on that list. There's like, it was like seems like a big round.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously $100 billion, big round. But yeah, just to see that, like, this isn't that normal of a thing to see like a bunch of traditionally competitors, all investing in the same company.
Right.
This is one of those pieces of evidence that the AI revolution is a uniquely centralized one.
Right. I think I've heard it compared to more of the cloud revolution, right? So you sort of see the same kind of thing playing out, where ultimately the winners of cloud were us, Google, and Amazon, of course. And that was because they could afford to build the biggest servers in the world and have enough space for everybody. Seems closer to that. I'm very curious if AI is going to enable like a second tier. So like in the data world, I think we've gone down that rabbit hole before, but you saw a lot of startups sort of act as middlemen. So it's like, oh, I need a redundancy on Azure and Google Cloud and AWS. And so someone runs that in between for you, or someone runs monitoring of these things for you. Maybe we'll see that here. Like maybe that's the startup opportunity if the frontier models are just priced out.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it plays.
And with any, talks about the geopolitics of this, I'm assuming it was all very, American only or like Western only, I guess, investment. Like, are they, Sam A went on the record talking pretty strongly about, the whole like East versus West, stuff like that. Is that coming into play here yet? Or are they kind of just, hey, we're America, we're going to be number one, that sort of thing?
Well, I think there was some notion of investment in Saudi Arabia or sort of that region. I don't know if they actually went through with that. I know that was a controversial thing, at least if Dwarkish podcast guests are to be believed. That was a controversial decision within OpenAI. So maybe that went through, maybe it didn't, but I would assume there's a non-trivial risk in locating your data centers outside of the West, but maybe that's worth the risk if you're gonna get 1 or 2% ahead of the competing model.
Yeah, but the data centers, it seems like the data centers won't be for training at the very least. So we can start there. That like, if you're building some data center in Saudi Arabia or Japan or wherever, that's not where you're training your next foundation model, right? Like at most, if it's Japan, that's maybe where you're training like, a smaller model or some new experiment. But really, most of that's probably happening in the Valley.
Yeah.
Like locally. And it seems like that would be a lot of inference hardware. So it would be interesting to see if like, how does the global rollout of these products go? And like, Europe is probably a good place to look for it, right? Because there are a lot of regulations about where European data can go. And so inference for European users will likely have to be happening in Europe. And so if they get the new model at the same time as America, that will be telling. And if they don't, that will be really telling, right? And so, because we're not equally allies with all of the European countries.
It's also probably I think you're right on inference. It's like, okay, we want to co-locate servers near customers where they're going to be doing inference. And yeah, to your point, if we need to fork the model or there's different restrictions, then okay, great, you want to have servers in those countries. But yeah, I'm with you. I think we're talking stateside for massive server farms. I think the actual states where these things are housed are like places with a ton of cheap land. There was a rumored one in Wisconsin. Obviously, we have no knowledge of that, but if that's true, that makes sense. NSA famously went to Utah for their big data center.
Yep.
You're talking anywhere with a lot of land that's cheap and access to energy, right? There was the Mark Andreessen quote: "The ideal AI startup is a data center located next to a nuclear power plant."
Right, exactly.
Interesting.
But feels like things are getting serious. I mean, that rolls into the discussion of what's hot on Twitter is OpenAI is not shipping. And I think one way to explain that is, if the new model is as badass as people think, do you ship that to people, or do you just take 15 instances of 50 instances, 100 instances of that model, have it be an AI researcher, and just crank on the next model? Like at some point, it might be more worth your time to have the current model build the next model than it is to help people make GPT wrapper startups, right?
And even before that, even before you have a model that's capable of out-researching human researchers, we've already seen how synthetic data generated from a large model, like a teacher model, can teach a student model to act like the teacher.
Great point.
Much smaller model. This is how we have things like Phi and like Gemma 2, like the 2B model, that are quite capable for their size. In some domains, even rivaling much larger models. And so that to me that's how I've read the recent rumors. Or Chris was talking about one set of rumors or one set of feelings from the.
I like the far out there stuff, man. Come on.
Right, and but I think there's this other set of rumors that like. Well, there are people focused on the fact that OpenAI is not shipping, and then there are other people focused on the fact that OpenAI is not shipping. Like, what are they working on, right? And so, right. Sometimes it goes as far as maybe they have an AI researcher making AGI, and I think it was like the Information article that was talking about, it's actually a combination of a larger model that's showing promise and an inference time trick that we've talked about on the show in the past, known as Q-Star or Strawberry or whatever other set of code names that have circulated around Twitter. And so, if they're actually just using like what is a noticeable but reasonable step up in intelligence via this new model and this new sort of inference architecture, then then maybe they're just making synthetic data. But maybe that is what is keeping them from shipping, and maybe that is actually why we haven't seen a new model yet.
Which is extremely hard to red team, right? The smarter the thing gets, the harder it is to keep it contained.
Right, and I think that's actually a really interesting point. Like, maybe we should talk about that for a minute, because like we were having this discussion offline about like, will things like Auto GPT or AutoGen or Agent GPT or a bunch of these like open source frameworks that like provably make models smarter, right? Like when you orchestrate multiple models or even just multiple instances of the same model in these sort of agentic systems or multi-agentic systems, then you get much better outputs, and you get this sort of like intelligence of the crowd almost from a bunch of different instances of a supposedly dumb agent. And so there are so many avenues. The point of this is that there are a lot of different avenues that you would have to test if you wanted to thoroughly red team a new model, right? It's not just oh, all the different domains that this could possibly output or that queries could possibly be in. It actually goes beyond that. It's like, how could developers use this? And then if they start deploying it at some sort of scale, then how could that look different? And I don't know how much of this they're going to test. Like, this is a very reasonable question.
I think two things here. The first is there's also the context of it's an election year, and there is a huge amount of responsibility of, imagine, to this point, if you haven't done all this testing and you put out something that could just be much more intelligent than you anticipated as soon as you use some of these combination things. And I'm sure they've been looking at this if they've had, any level of GPT-5 or whatever they call it now. Like, what's the Twitter thing they're calling it? GPT-Next or whatever. There was like diagrams from the, OpenAI Japanese CEO and stuff like that. Regardless, if they've had this much more intelligent model, they must be thinking about these things. The other thing is we have actually had a very rapid amount of growth, right? Like, people are like, oh, they must be sitting on this model for the last year or two. Why are they waiting? Blah, blah, blah. Like, all those theories. The other way to look at it is we went from, even just taking the most obvious video example, like the Will Smith spaghetti meme, right? To now having videos that are actually looking pretty good in 12 to 18 months. And then when you start, we've talked about this before in the podcast, think about the price and the availability and the speed, that's pretty crazy, right? So now we're saying, this next frontier model will be significantly more intelligent and might just be around the corner. When we got the last frontier model a year ago, the way we're able to make, ones and zeros accelerate in growth is getting pretty crazy, right?
Yeah.
And it's going to get much harder to then catch up in atoms and stuff. But I kind of look at it kind of to your points of red teaming is hard, and actually we've had so much, growth between the frontier models. I think it's actually, Jacob's seen a good meme of trying to keep up with all the AI news is actually hard. There's so much going on in terms of the ones and zeros side of things. So maybe it is realistic that it takes extra couple of months for something that is potentially getting pretty radical. When you think about it, we've kind of already broken the Turing test, right?
Oh, for sure.
You can definitely, the goalposts have kind of moved, right? That used to be wow, will we ever get there? Now we're just we just take for granted that you could have even a small
100%.
language model that fully breaks the Turing test. It's very, very small. And now we're talking about something that could be exponentially more intelligent than that. That's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is really well said. The thing that AI Twitter won't take into account is, hey, we're not done getting the value out of 4.0. I mean, at all, right? People are still getting value. I mean, we're still discovering ways this thing can get used. We're still layering systems like AutoGen on top of it, and you start to see, oh my gosh, what else can I get out of this by having multiple instances of the model working in a coherent
total
way.
tangent, is advanced voice mode even out?
Supposedly, right?
Slowly
Small rollout.
out. That's what
Slowly
it seems like. Yeah.
Yeah.
Limited rollout.
But, I mean, even there, right? We're not even getting the current capabilities that we definitely knew about. And I would probably put that towards red teaming and stuff like that.
I'm taking election interference on that, right? If you can get it to mimic any voice you want, think of the calling you could do, thinking of the videos you could do. And if you purposely made a low quality video, right, you make it seem like it's at a donor dinner and you throw a politician saying something crazy in the background, but the video is just a chair leg and it's blurry. That's gonna go all over the internet around the world 3 times before the truth even puts its shoes on, something like that's the analogy. That's a thing. I think the dumbest Twitter rumor is that OpenAI is cooked and doesn't have anything. All the evidence in the world says they have something, right?
Yeah.
All of it.
Yeah.
Samsung getting on stage, yesterday, being hey, here's GPT-Next on this scale. Can't tell you what it is, but I don't know how you would tell a story of many companies all telling the same lie at the same no, the model's real, but there's also very serious implications to shipping it. And unfortunately for Twitter influencers, the greatest concern is not the hype meter, right? It's not oh man, I haven't heard from something there. Just released blog posts. They're cooked. You're well, if you had something truly scary smart, you wouldn't hear from them, right? That's kind of how it works.
Oh my god, I had this argument with somebody on Twitter recently that I was they were oh, I wonder if, Sam's actually just hiding this to spite the leakers or whatever. And I was really? You think that in that room that's deciding sort of the fate of the world in some, or like the fate of society, according to some people, that they're sitting there and thinking about how AI Twitter is this like brain dead subset of Twitter is reacting. Like, do we really think they care? And then he was like, I think he called me naive for not, I don't know, for something. And I was like, I think,
Right.
and then my response was very similar to what you said, Chris, which is I think you're naive that you think the government can't hide something.
Right.
In
right,
fact,
of
I
course.
just know you're wrong, because if you learn about history, you know that they can hide things, and they can do
Sure.
a pretty good job at it.
100%. And there's that. There's the quote that scared Mark Andreessen, right? They were talking to the government, and they said, like, well, at the end of the day, this is just math, and you can't ban math. Like, you can't restrict math. And they're like, of course we can. We banned entire fields of physics from conversations. Of course we could. And that I haven't seen Mark Andreessen be on his back foot in many times, but that put him on his back foot. He's like, oh, okay. So I fully believe we don't want to ship it there, that they don't want to ship before an election. I fully believe they have a new model. And I fully believe AI Twitter is just mad they're not getting those sweet engagement dollars. Like, I think that's it at the end of the day.
And it could also just be dopamine. Like, it's just fun. It's hype to see how fast this is going.
Yeah.
Like, I love seeing when new things come out, and excited to see. I mean, Apple's about to do another announcement next week.
Yep.
Audience will definitely have a react to that. But there's so much going on, and again, I stress the audience to recognize like how fast AI is really developing. It's honestly ludicrous, and I think one of my big concerns moving forward is going to be the fact that, like, even when we get superintelligence, things aren't going to be solved in the real world, right? Like, that's where you're going to come across, like, I keep using this phrase, like, ones and zeros and atoms, but we're not just overnight going to have, everything solved by, like, robots that are already physically connected, and now we have, like, flying cars and shit. Like, that's just not going to happen. And I think I worry a bit about tech Twitter and that sort of folk that are expecting AI to get to a point and just solve all problems. When like,
overnight.
AGI 2027 and 2030 we live forever. Like, that's just not happening, right? There's no way we're solving societal issues. I think AI is a societal issue, not a tech issue. The tech seems to be pretty well, like, sorted, right? That's just kind of a money problem, and Silicon Valley has now decided we're putting, Apple, Nvidia, whatever, Microsoft, they're all investing tons and tons and tons, hundreds of billions, and that will be enough, it seems like, right? Like, that is a ridiculous amount in any field, but they're like, hey, we're doing it, and we're going to get superintelligence. It seems like, this is happening. But after that point, then what happens? I think that's the million-dollar question.
Right.
And I think a lot of people are still optimistic of, like, it will be solved, and I think it will be solved, but I hope that we minimize the amount of societal, injury or pain that happens during that transition, because it certainly could be a bit messy.
Well, and that's, people give these companies crap for talking to governments, but you have to talk to governments, because, like, this idea that we're suddenly entering post-scarcity to me is insane. Like, even if you have superintelligence, you still have people with guns and tanks deciding where resources go at the end of the day. So even if I come up with a system where everybody benefits and all of it's great, you still have to get the guys with tanks and guns to decide we're going to allow that, right? Like, if tech Twitter just believes we get superintelligence and suddenly all government policy issues are solved. We don't need the UN anymore. Like, it's all just rainbows and unicorns, right? No, it's going to be a bunch of people arguing, and there's going to be my AI versus your AI, and we still have to move food around the world, water around the world. We still have to move goods and services, and that still requires the cooperation of a ton of ancient political institutions. So I'm 100% with you.
And I think it's hard because you see all this progress and it's very exciting, but I think that is exactly the blind spot, that you start to not recognize that tech is its own little bubble and it's making lots of money and you feel potentially important because you make lots of money and so on, but that's not how 90% of the world, 99% of the world lives, right? Like, that is a very small bubble. Like, even when we talked about SSI with $1 billion, that's 10 people with now a company that's potentially worth $5 billion according, right? Like, each person is worth
something
500
simple.
million. Yeah.
Take something supposedly, like, not actually simple. It's incredibly complicated when you try to implement it, but something that sounds simple. Payments. There's still not a payment system that works globally across the world really well. People will say crypto, people will say all these various services, but Stripe still can't process payments in every country, right? And that's some of the smartest people in tech are working at Stripe, and that still just takes a lot of time. There's regulation, there's concern, there's government, there's laws, and I don't know where this belief that AI somehow leapfrogs all that.
And I think it's also, to Jacob's point, when people say like naivety, I think it is naivety when people are like, oh, those regulations are just, obstacles. Maybe this is me being a decel, but I think there are, governments have these things in place, usually for a pretty good reason, right? So it doesn't become the Wild West. Maybe that's different for you too. I'd like to hear opposing opinions, but I think a lot of the time, like, there are reasons for having these regulations and so on. So, like, to just leapfrog it, as you say, doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But again, we'll probably
I do think you're going to have interesting political consequences if you assume broad access to an AI that is capable of synthesizing the world's data, then the awareness people will have for things like regulatory capture or regulations that people sign up for that rely on them not fully understanding the space. Think about finance or places where things that are legal that maybe shouldn't be, but mostly because people understand it. That's fascinating to me, is potentially people understand it. So I think you will see policy shifts on account of it, not just in the defensive military case, but also if I can have an AI speak to me at a 5th grade level about any given issue, my capacity to be a more aware voter increases. Will people use that? I don't know. Will it actually play out that way? Who knows? But that does change the political calculus a lot. You can't just say random crap as a politician, because you're going to have community notes on steroids. It's going to be the millisecond you put that out, there'll be an explainer beneath it saying why you're wrong. And that is a very different political environment than we've ever lived through.
However, to play devil's advocate, would UX really develop that way? Because do people want fact or do they want stories? I think a lot of people, they want stories. They don't necessarily want to be exactly correct in everything. And I think you can see it with a lot of social media. They are purposely going away from having, facts or like, oh, this is it. Like, most people like junk food.
That's true.
And I think that is exactly what algorithms are doing nowadays. They're like, you want this actually, right? Like, and it's not true. And even if you know it's probably not true, you're like, but I'm inspired. I like this. This makes me motivated. Whatever. Like, that's more a motive than being like, hey, like, here's actually the law, and this is why this statement is factually incorrect. People are going to be like, I'm bored. I'm going to go to whatever is next that is just pumping me like AI content made exactly for me, that is getting me.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's a really good point.
Whatever. I think that's where, to me, some interesting regulations come through of how and where do governments step in terms of these things, right? Like, I think at this point, it's not going to be post-custody, both in terms of truth and like access to knowledge. Like,
because our government's so good at truth.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I guess my point is like, okay, to respond to this regulation thing, because you insinuated that I'm an anarchist. I'm not an anarchist. Like, I do believe in regulations for certain things, but I don't know if I believe on regulations on truth. That seems like too much, and the government has all these interests to protect. And clearly, they don't tell the truth all the time. Like, history tells us that they don't tell the truth all the time. And so, what role will AI be? There's like a millennia-old debate on like what role does the government have, or what role do leaders have. There are all these theories. You can read books about them, and you can probably just apply all those different theories to AI. Should AI have, absolute control over humanity because it's better than us? Should it serve every individual person, and then the sum of that will be some great outcome? Like, there are all these different versions of how AI can affect us at the highest levels, and it'll probably look, honestly, like the breakdown of what people think about that will probably look like some sort of political breakdown, like the political compass breakdown.
Yeah, or cultic, right? It'll be like this sort of like, I'm on this team and you're on that team, and I mean, that leads us into one of the other news pieces, which is Grok 2. So, like, part of the value of these questions is, like, if you have multiple foundation models, you get to run a bit of this experiment, right? Grok 2 is definitely more hands-off on the moderation. They are moderating, right? It's not completely just whatever you want, but they've taken a looser approach than, say, OpenAI or Anthropic has. And yeah, we'll see how it plays out. I mean, I think so far my hot take is it didn't destroy the world the way people thought it would. You got a lot of weird memes, you got a lot of presidential candidates doing awkward things, but because it's not photoreal and because I don't know, it seems like it had less impact than I even thought it would. I thought people would be tricked by it more often, or I thought people were going to use it in campaign ads. Like so far, the deepfakes I've seen in the U.S. election have been largely like, I don't know if they're using 11 Labs, but they're using some sort of voice tech to make ads or have people like voice over something in a way that's meant to be satire. Like they do not necessarily claim that's what they're saying, but obviously the like it's satire thing is either in really small text or like it's implied or something, right? So a lot more voice used for malfeasance than images so far, outside of Twitter bots getting better profile pictures. I mean, that's been a thing, but I was surprised. Like Grok 2's taken this wide open angle, and it hasn't been chaos. It's been a lot of memes, and then it kind of fizzled. Like it seems great, it seems powerful. Grok 3 is supposed to be a real contender, but it didn't. I think the AI safety crowd, rightfully so, is talking about all these issues and concerns, but the assumption was that it was going to be just chaos when you can allow images of political figures doing odd behaviors or smoking cigars or whatever it's going to be. And it kind of wasn't. Like, at least on social media, the vibe was, and maybe that's just my bubble, the vibe was just, yep, there's some laughs, there's some snark, there's people fighting about whether it's real or not, but it didn't make it to the mainstream news as far as I could tell. It did.
It did.
It did? Oh, okay. All right.
Oh, yeah. Elon Musk image generator makes photos of Kamala Harris. Yeah.
Sure. But there wasn't like a big scam. It wasn't like, someone so-and-so was at this crazy place or doing this crazy thing.
Oh, no. No, not like that. It was more like the news reacting to just the existence of the images rather than the impact that the images had.
Actually, I take it back. I do have a fun story on that. There is the allegation on Twitter briefly. There was a document that was supposed to show the scripted end to the Taylor Swift relationship. Was it Travis Kelce? Is that who she's with?
Yeah, Kelsey. Yeah.
And so there was a document that looked really official. It looked like it came from his marketing agency, his sort of PR folks, that said like, here's how it's going to end and here are the conditions. Turns out it was all AI generated. So I take it back, but I don't think it was Grok that generated the document. But I did see a little deep fake action making some news. So for a day, people were convinced this was proof the relationship was scripted. So maybe we'll see more of that.
That's a perfect example of something you could totally do without AI.
100%. In
a day.
1,000%.
It's not even like you could do it in AI in orders of magnitude less time than you could do it without AI. Like
Right.
And so then the scale question is like, for me, it's always been one of my worries as an accelerationist overall. One of my worries that I keep is that, like, influence. If these models get really, really smart and they can influence us in ways where the person using the model to influence people doesn't even know how the influence is happening. Oh, if I show them pictures of pigs, then they suddenly vote Democrat. Or whatever, right? Because humans are weird. And, like, we have, psychology shows, like, we have some strange things. Like, you can hack us. And so if AI figures out how to hack us, that's one thing that I'm worried about. But I don't think this is an example of that, right? Like, because it's still something that you could do without AI, and because it's something that kind of requires you to be willing to accept whatever is in front of your eyeballs to believe.
I guess I weirdly think video is the one I'm most concerned about right now, more than document or image gen, because I think the era of Photoshop plus the era of Instagram filters has sort of started inoculating us against believing images we see. Like the default assumption with any image online is it's shopped, right? One of the first comments will be photoshopped, faked. Video's sort of starting to flirt with that, with all of the real-time sort of filters you can apply on TikTok and other things, but I still feel like video is more default believed than any other medium.
Although every single video I see on TikTok, I haven't been on TikTok in a while, to be fair, but the top comment is usually this is fake, but it's not about this was generated. They mean
the kids are going to be all right.
Staged, right? They mean that people were acting. And
right.
And it's not the same thing, but it is a little similar in the way that you were saying Instagram filters and then maybe even live video filters are conditioning us slowly, like lobster being boiled alive in the pot, to this idea of like we can't trust videos or images anymore. But I did have this interesting conversation with like a family friend at dinner, and they seemed very concerned that we won't be able to trust images, and maybe we already can't trust images, and we won't be able to trust video soon. And I sort of understand, because we've all lived our lives where videos and images were at least a somewhat trustworthy medium. Like, I mean,
sure.
they're admissible to a certain degree in court.
Yeah.
But for the vast majority of human history, there weren't images and videos, right?
Yeah.
That you could just capture and then replay. And
What's your take, Dylan?
Yep.
I just think that we don't. We can go to Dylan's take.
I was just gonna say, like, to your point about human psychology, I think the scary thing about video is it's a lot closer to like what the human brain just believes is real, right? Images still, that's very rare. When we didn't have photos or anything for the last hundreds of millions of years, right? Like something still didn't make sense. Whereas like something moving is very normal. So I think it is pretty obvious why like a video seems more scary in that regard. But a lot of the videos are still like uncanny valley. You can just tell. You look at it, you're like, I'm hoping that's going to be like a good way of, I mean, it's definitely getting more photorealistic. But even then, I think people will see and hopefully will be a little bit skeptical of what they see, sort of thing. But
I think we still live in a time where more people have thought that somebody playing FIFA was a live soccer game, or somebody playing Madden was a live football game, than people seeing an AI-generated video and thinking it was real. Like, we still live in that world, and so as long as we still live in that world, but then again, it goes back to Chris's point of like, there are these glimmer, even though like we haven't had the big shock of, oh my god, we can't trust any videos anymore. There are these glimmers of like, I remember my dad telling me like, oh, I walked into this bar and somebody was playing FIFA, and for like 30 minutes I thought it was a real soccer game.
Yeah. I think the point on video being closer to what people experience is a really great one. I don't have a great counter to that. But I was thinking how, like, what is our inoculation to this on text, right? Because ever since the word processor, anybody and their cousin could write text. And it's still just going to come down to sources, right? You're going to trust certain sources. Certain people are going to become more trustworthy. So I'm not as worried about this abstract, how can I trust what I see? Because it's going to be the same thing humans have done forever, right? How do you trust a rumor you heard? Well, who'd you hear it from? And what's their character? And how do you think about it? And so I think this furthers a trend of trust going down to an individual level. Like at this point, I would trust a given Substack more than a major outlet or something, just because I know the incentive of the individual. And so like, okay, well, if that's the case, will we just develop these same sort of antibodies where you go to sources to trust, and sure, the whole internet will get taken by certain scams, but maybe it's not as world-ending as people think. Maybe it just ends up being the same sort of social trust layers that people have always had. And for a brief moment on the internet, we had these things of like, it was always like growing up, you saw a video on the internet, you could be pretty sure it was real. And maybe that was just a weird blip in time where it was like this decentralized trust that now is going to get more to, I guess not centralized, but this sort of default trust to video will now just be filtered through the same filter rumors go through.
I always kind of have trouble with the AI scam idea, because like, while it will be real and there will be AI scams, first of all, the grand experiment of the internet has proven that people are stupid enough that scams have economic value.
Sure.
So that's a thing. But then, additionally, to be the techno-optimist, I see a world in which the AI future, there are less scams, right? Like, generally when someone gets scammed, it's because there is somebody more savvy than them scamming them.
Right.
And if you're in a world where everybody has their GPT-5 powered agent, the scammer has a GPT-5 powered agent, and so does the scammy. And so the gap, I mean, and even if the scammer is using some autogen scam on top of GPT-5, the gap in intelligence isn't enough for the, scammy's agent to get scammed. And so, in the fullness of time, we should have no scams, hopefully.
I would agree with the point of fullness in time. I think my concern is, and even as you say, the point of, would AI like influence us? Could you have something, could someone exert on you an influence as well? I think, when I think of my like grandparents and my parents, they have no shot. Even if we give them like a fantastic agent, I think it might take a surprisingly long amount of time before we start using AI and agents, as well as we could. Even for example, like Jacob, I know you like use things like you're like a great dog fooder, right? Like for me, I might have ChatGPT and then I don't use it, and then I think back, I'm like, why the fuck didn't I just like whip out my phone and use it, right? Or like, there's so many instances like I catch myself even doing this stuff. I'm like, that would have saved me so much time. Like even though I have the tool, I don't use it, right? I'm still stuck. Like, oh, I'll go do like a Google search, or I'll go hit against
it's habits, man. Yep.
Yeah, it's habits, right? And with like an even older generation, it might take even longer. So I think that's my worry about the like pain of like once we get real superintelligence, that there might be this kind of period where like everyone could have it democratized, but even if you have the power in your hands, you might not use it, right? And like I think it's an interesting thing, even with like, to come back to Grok 2, I do wonder where the balance is naturally of people who want to create versus people who just want to consume now. Mm-hmm. Like you have access to Grok 2 and you could go ahead and make your memes or make whatever you want to make. But I think a lot of people, it might have just fizzled out, not because of any capability issue, but because people are like, wow, it's actually really hard to create. I'm going to go back to just like, scrolling past or, just consuming whatever I want.
Do you think even if you could drop the difficulty level to be trivially easy to make something, do you think that meaningfully moves the ratio of creators? Because like one of the long-standing internet things with social networks was that single-digit percentage of your users ever create content, right? I mean, ever.
Yep.
Like Facebook famously pushed this a little bit because they got a bunch of people uploading family photos, but even that, as the service got bigger, started trending back down to only a few people make content. Does that trend, is that just a law of nature, or does this change with AI?
I would say it doesn't change. That would be my guess.
TikTok is the counter argument.
Is it?
Yeah.
TikTok says that it will change. You'd be surprised how, like...
Oh, I disagree.
If you click on random people on TikTok, the amount of people that are making videos for no viewers, particularly women on TikTok, actually.
Sure.
It's women make videos of themselves. This is all my own observation.
We know where Jacob's algorithm leans.
And young women and young men make videos. They stay anonymous and make videos like compilations or reposts of other things.
Yeah.
But I would have to imagine that the like user to poster ratio on TikTok is way higher than these other platforms, because I noticed it and I was like, oh my god.
I take the bet it trends down.
Content for no one.
Because Instagram famously had this, right? Instagram people used to post a lot. People were posting all the time when the barrier to entry was low, the expectations were low. And as the quality got better, as more professionals started doing it, as the expectations got higher, the wall of silence continues. So I'm with you that I think current TikTok would have a higher percentage. I think the battle is always, does it hold? Does it hold that... Because you have this, even running the business, you have this problem of, well, my biggest creators drive the most views, so it makes sense for me to incentivize the algorithm to show them more often, because that keeps them making great quality content. But it also discourages newer creators if I don't boost them. But if I boost them a lot, the odds of them making good content is low, and so then do I lose consumers because they're just seeing low quality stuff and they see just enough that they fall off. So it's always tuning this algorithm to try to be novelty mixed with certainty to keep you in the loop.
Right, but I guess the argument would be that TikTok is
True.
different.
It's a broadcast, yeah, okay.
Right, and what I feel like TikTok did for people, and part of it was, to your point, because it was a new platform and had unique incentives of a new platform, it was pushing a lot of novel content.
Right.
But I think there's something beyond just the early TikTok state and something deeper about just like what TikTok has brought to the table, which is like, it feels like there are more specific buckets. Like we've talked on the show in the past about algorithms sort of just bucketizing people.
Yeah, right.
And on a lot of traditional social media, there really aren't that many buckets. And so they show a lot of like the same content. Like there's very few content streams and they all kind of go to people. And so on TikTok, it seems like there are more smaller sort of emergent communities. And because of that, people can post content and get views, get like significant feeling views. It's a combination of the short form and of the sort of vibe of their algorithm. But I think there is something special there that like I would be interested to see how that progresses, right? Like to me the TikTok generation is the everyone is a creator generation, whereas we come from the like YouTube generation. It's very different. It's like the look, we follow the creators. Like we transitioned right from MTV into YouTube, and so like there was a thing that we all had to do, right? In terms of like, these are real celebrities, now these are fake celebrities, but we feel like they're real celebrities, but the news is saying they're fake, and then now everyone's accepted that big YouTubers are real celebrities, and just so what is that next phase? And it seems like TikTok must be the hallmark for what that is. And my reading might not be correct, but we should look at TikTok to figure out what it is.
I mean, I hope it does, to your point, like trend like that younger generations hopefully are inspired to create more. I think that paints a much more optimistic future as well, right? Like, if we are going to hit things with superintelligence, got to be real. Like, what is the point of a lot of work we do nowadays, right? And I think part of it could just be you're tired, right? Like lots of people just don't have the energy. They are slaughtered after 9 to 5 and 9 to 9. You know, some people have to like work really hard, and then it's like, what time do you have to create? Am I going to be good enough? Like, you know, leave it to professionals. Maybe the younger generation is just not exposed to that same stuff, and they just maybe there's this like anti thing of like, you're an iPad kid, you see this stuff, you're like, I could do that because I'm an 8-year-old with like a phone and I know how to record, whereas like paradoxically, a 40-year-old with like all this skill might be like, I don't know, like, I don't think I can be in front of the camera, you know,
there's
like
definitely
that sort of thing.
I think there's a generational value prop here too, where like my family friend of ours is a high school teacher, and the amount of kids that want to be content creators as their full-time job is incredibly high. Like, whereas it was still somewhat shameful in my generation, at least, right? I'm 33. Being a content creator was like, so you couldn't make it in Hollywood or like you couldn't make it in real media, so you had to slum it.
Honestly, though,
down here.
Was it even a viable path around our generation? It was maybe just starting out, but I don't think a lot of people saw it as like a...
Not at the scale it is now, because there's more viewers.
People didn't... Well, there are more viewers, but there were also far less creators. Like, far less. And so it was a very viable path. And the evidence I have for this is 12-year-old me, who had a lot of experience watching YouTube videos and got, like, slightly obsessed with making YouTube videos. Like, I was trying to learn how to edit, and I wasn't finding high enough quality editing tutorials for the things I wanted, so I was like, hell yeah, I'll make my own. And so I did, and when I look back, at the time I was pretty proud of them. I am pretty proud of them now, adjusted for the fact that I was 12. If I had made it now, wouldn't be so proud. But I have, like, a couple 100,000 channel views, right? And, like, I made videos. There were just so few videos, and I found basically, like, a gap, a content gap is what YouTube calls it now, where there were people searching this term and there weren't enough videos or weren't good enough videos. And so I made videos and I got views and I got AdSense money, right? And I got, a couple $100 over a few years in AdSense money, which isn't a lot, but it was off 2 or 3 videos, right? And so, and those videos, this is old YouTube algorithm, but those videos were like consistently getting views for years, right?
Nice.
So it wasn't just like, and that's sort of, we can have a whole conversation some other time. Maybe once we get more success on this channel about like, how the YouTube algorithm maybe works. We have our theories. We're testing them now. But there definitely, it was, it wasn't that it wasn't a valid path. It was that it was a new path and new things scare people, right? Like the same thing is true. My cousin was, first 100 hires or first 100 engineering hires or something like that at Facebook. And he went to, a major university at a time when that major university didn't even have a CS department. So he had to go to a nearby state school to take computer science classes. And, people probably questioned what are you doing? What are you doing with your life? You're going to go work at some weird tech startup with some college kid as the CEO? And then he's the richest guy in the family now. And so I think it's like... It's a similar thing where at the time it wasn't that YouTube wasn't valid as a way to make money. It was that it wasn't respected, it wasn't understood.
Right,
a lot of the people making money
the
there
prestige
weren't
wasn't
optimally.
there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's a lot of factors, but I strongly believe that it was it's harder to make money on YouTube now than it was then.
Yeah, definitely. I 100% agree with that. And I think it's interesting to both your points of, is that value prop changing with this newer generation? Now that it seems viable and you can get a slice of the pie, it's now like, it seems viable. I know if that's a degree of just people also think that that's a motivating or cool career. Is it maybe like an anti-career? You know, like you don't want to be a doctor, you'd rather just
stay cool.
Subway Surfers and just whatever. Like, I mean, intrinsically it sounds cool, but you know, I don't know. There's all these theories. So
no. This anti-career topic is like, I think that's very interesting. Like, I definitely see that it's almost a response to how content creators were treated when we were kids, and it's like the pendulum swung to actually no, this is way cooler. Like, it's way cooler to not have a real job, right? It's like maybe some creators today, to expand this point out a little bit, maybe some creators today, whereas, sorry, to back up a little bit, creators 10 years ago were trying to convince people that this is a real job, or at least I'm supporting myself, and so I don't even know what a real job means, like, if this isn't that. And creators of today might be trying to convince people they don't have a job, which you know, you see with those unemployed friend memes and like these like sub 300 follower, like I saw a tweet today about how there are way more sub 300 follower like Instagram travel vloggers than you would imagine.
Oh god,
right?
yeah.
It seems like people don't want to have a job. It is in vogue to not be productive, which is interesting.
I think it's also a reaction to the volatility of the jobs market too, right? So many industries just getting like up and down waves throughout all of Gen Z's childhood. I mean, there was the meme of like someone showed Fight Club, right? The famous Fight Club, and the meme was an image of Edward Norton's character just standing at the copier, right? And it goes, "Oh no, I am solidly employed at a stable job with a 401k. My life is awful," right? So there's just like this lack of belief in the modern era. It's probably well founded that you could have this stable long-term career, and so a career where at least you own the outcome feels more stable than working at some of these companies where suddenly you get rifted and that's it, and now you got nothing to show for your time other than a 401k, hopefully, or just, you know, years spent.
And there's another element to it that's important, which is, and probably for some people, which is it's something you can start whenever. You don't need some degree, you don't need some
cover letter.
You don't even need a license, right? You don't even need to be necessarily a stated person, right? With a state. Like, you could be some refugee somewhere and make videos, right? And post them on YouTube. And so part of that like extraordinarily low barrier to entry is that, like, you know, humans are about the grift, right? And so like if there's some way to make money potentially in your mind, or make some progress in your life, if that's like getting a following or something, then, and it's got a really low barrier to entry, and whatever day I feel motivated, I can just do it that day and start and try.
Right.
Like that, to me, it feels like, if you lower the barrier to entry, there's probably some economic rule where like you necessarily increase the supply, right?
Yeah. And I mean, to take it back a step, I think what I'm interested in from the AI perspective is this like an enduring trait? Can humans, for example, become more creative given a lower barrier to entry? And I think that's important in the AI argument and AI world, because as we get this really amazing tools, are we as humans going to be able to actually make use of them, right? Or is the quote-unquote average person just going to be like, you know, no difference? Like that, to me, I think is a scary, or rather like bad outcome. Imagine we have these amazing tools and superintelligence that can help us solve these problems, but we just end up existing as we normally did. Like there's actually no physical change.
Right.
Like that seems kind of like wasted potential, right? Like we invested all this money, we have this like amazing tool, and yet nothing changes. That seems not great, you know? Like maybe it's not a bad outcome if we instead end up just destroying ourselves if we all used it correctly. But at the same time, I feel like, you know, Pandora's box is open, and it'd be dope to have lots of people be like, let's create, let's like see where we go with this.
I'm optimistic the answer to this is yes. I think more people will choose a creative work. I think, you see it. I mean, look at even Etsy. Look how many people Etsy empowered by just making your little stores, selling whatever random thing you want. And that was still a pretty high barrier to entry. You still got to learn these skills. You still have to make something novel. I think in a world of AI, creativity and novelty become the valuable resource in many ways, at least in the digital sphere. To your point, atoms are a different story, which sort of leads us into one of our news topics of game engine, game engine. So speaking of breaking down the barriers to entry to making something, you're making one of the most complex digital artifacts around, a video game. And this is a neural model that powers the first game engine capable of real-time interaction with complex environments, simulating Doom at over 20 frames per second on a single TPU. So this is...
maybe to simplify for a second.
Yes, yeah.
Basically what's happening is they I don't know if the audience knows the game Doom. It's a very early game. Yeah, right. If you don't, you should. It's a very famous game, famous for people getting it to run on every piece of hardware, including washing machines and pregnancy tests and the like. And so it's a system that instead of using any sort of traditional game engine or sort of any sort of code infrastructure to run this game, it's a model, and it's the same type of model that works when you ask ChatGPT to generate an image. But instead of having your prompt to generate the image, it has the last frame that was shown to the user and the user's input. And the model's been trained to base off of that. Like if you're pressing forward on the keyboard and the last frame was you in a room, then the next frame should be you in that same room, but having moved forward a little bit. And so the model is able to replicate the gameplay of Doom to the point where people viewing recordings, not necessarily people playing, but people viewing recordings of the real version of Doom and this AI version of Doom side by side can't tell the difference reliably.
Yeah. And that's an important distinction because I don't know if you guys watched the video closely. Maybe we can show it, but when the character turns back around, you're going to see a very definite sign that it's AI generated, which is the hallway behind them does not look like the hallway they just went down.
Yep.
So we still have an object permanence problem, right? We still have this problem of when I look back to my right and I look to my left, suddenly things are different because it's, to Jacob's point, it's generating in real time. Just like so a game engine normally precompiles a bunch of things and it is trying to run at 30 to 60 frames per second, so you have a lot of things done ahead of time. That's called, like, you bake in textures, you have light maps, you have things to try to help it, but game engines are complicated beasts that are trying to calculate physics and lighting and player position and bullet position and impacts and all of this every frame. And the best in the world at this is Epic Games, right? Unreal Engine, I think, is unambiguously your best game engine on Earth right now. And it is it's like a digital cathedral how complicated this thing was to make, and I don't think anybody even at Epic can tell you everything that's happening in every step of the engine. And so this is totally different, right? We're just going to generate each frame as we go. And they started with Doom on purpose, right? Because you want some old school graphics. This is not going to do photorealistic graphics at the moment.
Wait, can we pause?
Yeah.
Why can't it do photorealistic graphics? I had this thought today. I think they chose Doom because of the lore behind Doom and not because...
Oh, I disagree.
There's no reason that it shouldn't be able to
do
of course there
is.
Graphics.
Of course there is.
Why?
But how are the pixels...
It can't predict physics. Right?
Wait.
You're going to have all kinds of bad issues if you try to do a mod. Or if you try to do GTA 6, right? If you try to show a scene, the amount of things the player can do where the last few frames is not going to be enough information for what happens next is pretty freaking high. In Doom, the interaction range is very narrow.
It's definitely simpler. I agree that it's simpler. But, like, I think if you walked around in, like, Minecraft would be another example. I think you would probably do Minecraft. But it's not the photorealism that's the barrier, then, what you're saying.
It's probably the degree of intelligence,
complexity
right?
Of the game.
Correct. It's the understanding of the complexity of the scene. I agree with you, the graphical quality. Probably, like, maybe that's part of the 20 frames per second thing, because 20 frames is really low, right? For running Doom... Right. Like, people run that thing at 1,000,000 frames per second, right?
So my thought, well, but obviously if you're doing any sort of stable diffusion generation, the fact that you can get it down to multiple
it's crazy,
in a second is insanity, because when I run it on my computer, right, it takes multiple seconds to do one generation.
Yeah, right.
So I think one reason you might try Doom is because these stable diffusion systems are traditionally resolution constrained, and as you up the resolution, it's sort of like an exponential on the performance, so on the time to generate the image, which isn't great, right? Like if I double it's basically a function of, if you double the size of an image, you get a lot more pixels because there's 2 dimensions to that image. Right. And then, in a transformer architecture, you're doing a lot of like attention across all these pixels. And so, anyways, what we end up with is like a situation where maybe if you know that you're going to generate lower resolution images, so if you pick a lower game, then you won't notice that image is low resolution because the original game was low resolution. Right?
Yes.
Whereas if you tried to generate it on Call of Duty, let's say, you would get a very accurate down-resed screenshot of Call of Duty, is what I would imagine.
I think the other hot take is this probably only works for a single-player game. I don't know that you could do a multiplayer situation here. There's too many unknowns.
Well, okay, so, I mean, not anytime soon, but
Right.
1 year
there
from now?
already seems to be a pathway with existing technology. Like, Chris, we were talking offline. There was a thread on Twitter about putting objects into... It was like some model that was placing objects into scenes. And it used... The input was like some video for the scene, and then some structured data format that described where the object would go in 3D space.
Yep.
And then you input the object there. And so there are these like little things where it's like I could just even... I hadn't thought about it until you said that, but... I can start to think like, okay, I know high level, like netcode for 2D for multiplayer games traditionally versus, and then so like what engineering challenges are there in that process to get somebody else's inputs and somebody else's character onto your screen, basically. And so I think a lot of those problems maybe could already be solved given infinite compute, right, and given an infinitely powerful model. So this is to say, I don't think it'll happen anytime soon, but I do think there's sort of a light at the end of the tunnel on that, on trying to adapt these things to multiplayer.
Yeah, I mean, I'm super excited by the tech. I think there's a lot of caveats and sort of don't look behind the curtain moments happening in this demo, right? Like, don't turn around, keep going straight, don't do too many dynamic things. We didn't do higher resolution things because you would see the seams a whole lot more. It doesn't have an understanding of the physics of the world, which is paramount for a 3D game. In single player, it might not need that. But so if the rumor about Sora is true, the rumor about Sora was that they did use Unreal Engine in Sora, and that it was generating scene understanding and then generating the frame. And that's how they could get objects going behind things. Because like a classic problem in AI video is like you'll see person walks behind a telephone pole and comes out wearing a different outfit. And so the rumor was there was part of the training involved a 3D engine so that you could have this object permanence, you would train it on that. Well, so assuming you can give it that understanding... Yeah. You could do a photorealistic single-player game, to some extent at least, conceivably.
Well, don't we need some, like, context window thing here, right? Where, like, it seemed... I mean, I didn't read deep into that paper, but it seemed like it was really predicting off the last frame. And so if you can get to a point where, just like with LLMs and text, we have... It's not just based off the last token, it's based off of all these previous tokens, right? We're almost like we're compounding the attention problem to not only be like per token attention, but like, multi-token set attention. But I do think it seems like we have the methods to make future generations relevant to multiple past generations with things like multi-turn text interactions. So if we could do the same thing with images, and the example would be in the GPT-4o multimodal blog, one of the examples they showed was image out. So they started with an image, they instructed it, the model, to edit the image. So then native multimodal, it based on the encoded tokens of the previous image, outputted the edited image, and then there was more feedback, another image, and this is all happening in the same chat. And so the image is not just based on the previous image, but the whole chat is what I would understand, since it's based on the same architecture. Like, I would be this is all a long way of saying I would be very interested to see what happens when Game Engine 2 is based off of a multimodal transformer architecture as opposed to a diffusion architecture. Because it seems like the problem Chris is talking about will be gone.
Yeah.
But
that's fascinating.
Well, this is super exciting. What does using transformers or any LLM, any AI architecture, give beyond having an AI develop a better game engine? like part of this is like awesome to see how
Yes,
like the technology is
right,
progressing.
right.
But I feel like, for example, like is the best approach to instead say AI now make me Unreal Engine 6, right? When we have superintelligence, like I think it's going to be an interesting question of how will we best use superintelligence moving forward, and how do we even define that? Like for example, generating the next frame, although it can do that, fantastic. Like that, there could be so many cool things to do with that. But should it render a game when you could instead say, hey, go take 2 hours of cycles, and because you're in superintelligence, you now made Unreal 6, and now the not superintelligence can use Unreal 6 to make cool games, and now
or even simpler cursor for Unreal Engine, right? Just being able to speak to it and have it change the engine the way you want. I think one question I'd have, and I'm a bit out of my technical depth here, but my assumption would be that in a photorealistic scenario, realistic physics-based games would have an advantage here. Because part of the problem with doing this would be, if I wanted to make a sufficiently far out sci-fi universe or fantasy world, I have shit training data for that. I have not a lot of context for that. I don't have a lot of references for that. Suddenly this technique starts to show its problem, because it can't predict the next frame of my winged velociraptor from planet Valerian, right, doing this behavior. Maybe it can.
I think it probably can. I mean, we've gotten very imaginative in the last 100 years with TV and movies and games.
That's true.
So there's like a lot of very imaginative training data. And a lot of, like, I remember a very early DALL-E demo for DALL-E 2 or whatever, before anybody knew about this stuff, it was like an avocado chair or something. And or I forget exactly what the example was, but it was something that like explicitly wasn't in the training data, and it was like taking two things that were in the training data, a chair and an avocado, and so that
Fair.
type of sort of this is not actually translational learning, but I'll use the word, could help with this kind of scenario.
Yeah. And honestly, unfortunately, I think this is mainly speculation. It's so hard to even predict this.
Okay, there's one point where we wouldn't be speculating, which is to say that you're always going to go with what's most efficient, right? As an engineer, at least in the near term, for every sort of element of the system, you'll consider, even as AI is getting way better, right? You'll consider, like, is it more efficient to do this analytically, or is this more efficient to do this with some sort of AI system, right? And so, like, and then you can sum things up, right? So if I'm rendering the next frame with AI, I'm taking over a lot of processes that Unreal traditionally would have spun up, right?
True.
And I'm not doing the physics process. I'm not doing any of the render pipeline. I'm not doing any of the shaders. I'm doing one big compute job, and I'm trying to get it done in under a frame time, like under a 60th of a second or whatever, right? And so I think what's more likely is that we'll see some sort of combination of these systems first, something like that Nvidia paper that had Minecraft running, and then they were running some model that turned the voxel representation into a photo row representation. So Minecraft, the system was handling physics, it was handling the generation of the world, it was handling a lot of things that might require sort of burden from the model, and then the model was just handling the take this image and turn it into something photorealistic.
That's interesting. So AI is the sort of up-resing step at the end. Oh, that's interesting.
And that step was, the only reason that people went to do this game engine thing was because that using Minecraft as a crutch thing had already been done and shown by Nvidia that, we can do that. So then the next step was, can we use the model? Can we make a diffusion model that just is the game engine, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's interesting, but I do think it'll really come down to like some sort of like back to freaking university here, like some sort of Big O. Like we'll need some new version of Big O that takes into account like non-deterministic systems, so that you can compare across and say like computationally, like how many resources am I spending on this part of the problem, right? Like we get sort of very scientific here, very big brain.
Yeah. And I honestly hope that happens sooner than later. I mean, famously, like the whole ChatGPT and stuff, when it first came out, people were asking like 2 + 2, and it was the most expensive calculation like ever done. Right?
Right.
Right.
We can compare it to 2 + 2 in bits, right?
Yeah. And you're like, I just wasted like 10 cents of electricity and this massive like data center that's capable of all this amazing stuff to do something that would take, like literal electrons to run, right? So it is not great. So it'd be great if we do that. Obviously, we're still at the stage of adoption and showing these demos and stuff like that. That's why I think this is like an amazing paper. But it's so interesting to think of the next possibilities of like, okay, it can do this. Should we do it? Right? I think right now with AI, we probably need a excess of intelligence, right? It can do all these things, and then we can take a step back and be like, okay, but should we do these things and why?
Right.
Like I don't even think like with this like, as Jacob said, like big O stuff, it's like we're at the point where like I think like AI companies need adoption, need money and so on. Once you can get to a point where it can do all these things, then it's like, wow, like, we talked about at the start of the podcast, like tens of billions, hundreds of billions of investment in infrastructure. Then suddenly you're like, okay, well, that's a lot of money. How are we best using this infrastructure? Like cloud compute obviously has been a big thing over the last 10 years. And we've gotten very good at learning how to do that, right? And that's because it's like, you're trying to win market with like, cents on the dollar sort of thing. Whereas in AI, it's like, you can just say like, hi, I worked at OpenAI and you get $1 billion thrown at you. But when they start actually competing for real use case and like everyone has their AI agent and it's working hard, we're going to have to make some like tough decisions like that. So I hope that comes sooner than later. I think it's a super interesting research problem as well. But obviously you can just print money researching like hype AI stuff at the moment. So
right.
I think over time
and honestly, there's this interesting tension for a company that's investing a lot in AI, let's say, and let's say they're a big company, so they get a lot of attention on the news, and you want to show there's a lot of demand for you to show, even though hey, it's going to take a few years for this to be the big payoff we want. That investors don't understand that, and that you need to show return on investment to continue getting the investment you need to do this, the biggest project humanity's ever done. Let's be real about what this is, right? This is the pyramids of Giza times 1 billion, right? And so,
if we pull it off, yeah,
right. If we pull it, no, but it is that. We'll just see if we do it, right? And so, I think like we'll have to see how these sorts of like the tension between I want to show that we're making money and I want to be able to keep playing the game, right? And then the flip side of that is, okay, we're starting to win the game and we need to be the most efficient we can now, or we need to figure out how this is actually going to be implemented, because we don't need to convince Wall Street, we need to convince developers or something like that, right?
Yep.
It'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yep.
Trade-offs all the way down. Well, I think that's all the news stories we have for today to cover. So thank you, everybody. So please like and subscribe. Send us more comments in the chat. We'd love to cover topics that are interesting to you all. We'd love feedback. It's early days here at the Feature Crew, so any and all feedback is much appreciated. Every single subscriber is greatly appreciated, so thank you all to everybody who already subscribed, and hopefully we can convert a few of you who haven't. And great to have Dylan back. It was not the same without you, so appreciate you being back, brother.
Yes. I don't know if you watched any of the episodes, but we mentioned you in every episode. We were like, Dylan's coming back.
Longingly,
guys.
In fact.
Don't worry, I'm still catching up, honestly.
Thanks,
Awesome.
everybody.
All right.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.